Very good day to all gents. I again hope all to be good. So now, gents, I would like us to go through how to find the equation of a quadratic function. Remember that your quadratic function would have the general form or the standard form f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. So now to find this equation means we have to determine the values of a, b, as well as c. So now one way to do so would be to go through the roots method. So what the roots method does is, if you know the roots, so remember that the roots would just be the x values of your x-intercept. So that in itself would just be xa, xb for this sketch over here. So now remember that for this sketch, you would essentially have a being greater than 0. So that's a positive a. This in itself would make the x value of the turning point to be a minimum. So that in itself would be a minimum. Remember that the x value of your turning point is also your axis of symmetry. So remember that the axis of symmetry just cuts the graph itself in half. So what we can then say is that the distance from A to the axis of symmetry, and then from the axis of symmetry to B would essentially be the same. So you can then say that XA, which is the root of the sketch itself, plus XB, which would be another root, divide by 2, would actually give you your axis of symmetry, which in this case would be a minimum and would be equal to 1. So that in itself would be how you could find the values of XA as well as XB. But then obviously that would depend on if you had another equation to find the XA and the XB. So you could also do something very similar with this second sketch over here. So the second sketch is clearly concave down. So the first one was concave up with A being greater than 0 and giving you a minimum axis of symmetry. So now the second sketch would actually give you a maximum axis of symmetry. So the axis of symmetry in itself would be in a maximum position. By the way, the maximum and the minimum usually only applies to a, so this in itself usually applies to the y values. So remember that this in itself would just be a maximum y value, whilst this here would be a minimum y value. So now we can then also interchangeably use it as x equals 2 would be at a maximum. So that would be if you had to sub in this x equals 2 into the equation, you would get a maximum y value. So again, this in itself is just your axis of symmetry, which cuts your graph in half. So you can then say that your roots, which would be xc, the x value of the x-intercept, as well as xd, would be, so if you had to half them, so you would need to add them, then half them. These would then equal your x value of your turning point, which is your axis of symmetry. So now that in itself is very important in finding the equation of a quadratic. Once you found your roots, you can then make use of the equation ax minus whatever the root is. So maybe I'll just have the root as 5 and the other root as 7. So now once you found your roots, you can then write your equation in this form. You can then, to find A, since A would be the only unknown, so A in this case would be the only unknown. To find A, you can use any point on the graph. So whatever point you're given on the graph, you can sub in for the Y as well as the X. And that would then enable you to find A. So also remember that for this sketch over here, A would need to be positive, whilst for this second sketch, A would need to be negative. So now I've prepared a few questions for us. So I'm gonna just move on to the next page for us to attempt the question. So I'll move on to the next page. So now it says given f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. M minus 1 and m plus 5 are roots of f of x. So that would be m minus 1 as well as m plus 5 being roots of f of x. The maximum value of f of x occurs when x equals 6. So now that would be the axis of symmetry. So now it means if we had to sub in this x value into the equation, we should then get a maximum value of y. So now based on this, we can then deduce, or rather, let's move on to the question itself. So the question 1.1 wants us to calculate the value of m. So now to calculate the value of m, we have been given the roots. So I'm gonna just move on to the next page for this. So let me just erase this a bit. So in the next page, we can then say that m minus 1, which is the one root, plus m, so that should be m plus 5 over there, m plus 5 divided by 2 should give us the axis of symmetry, which equals 6. To solve for m, we would firstly multiply both sides by 2. So maybe let's just add the top part. Actually, let's just multiply both sides by 2. And this would give us a 12 on the right-hand side. We can then add the m's, so that would be 2m, and then plus 4 equals 12. So this would be 2m equals, so the 12 minus 4 would give us an 8. Therefore, m would equal 4. So the value of m would then be equal to 4. Based on the value of m, so so that was 1.1. Let's move on to 1.2, which wants us to determine the equation of f of x in the form y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. If it is also given that f is to 4 equals 10. So now remember that this in itself is just a point on the graph. So this would just be 4 is to 10. So now let's move on to the next page for us to be able to attempt 1.2. So now this would then just be 1.2. So now we know that m minus 1, so we have an m minus 1 over there as one of the roots, as well as an m plus 5. So since these are the roots that we have, and we've already determined the value of m, we can then say that the actual root would then be 4, which is the value of m, minus 1, which equals 3. The other root would then just be 4 plus 5, which equals 9. So now what this means is that x would equal 3 and x would equal 9. So we can then say that the bracket that we will generate from here would then just be x minus 3. So remember that this equals 0. This equals, or rather, let me just go back a bit. I'm going to just go back a bit and say that the equation itself would essentially just be x minus 3 equals 0, or x minus 9 equals 0. So that's bracket over there. So we can then rewrite the equation as y equals a bracket x minus 3 x minus 9. Once we've done so, we can then make use of the point. So remember that the point that we were given, which we can then just write as that if we want to. So we can substitute in the value, the y to be 10 and the x to be 4. So that in itself would just be 4 minus 9. So we still have the 10, a bracket 1, and then that's negative 5. This then gives us a 10, which equals a negative 5a. Therefore, a will give you negative 2. So we've essentially found what a would be. So now we can then, let's just move on to the next page to finish off with the question. So I'm gonna just move on to the next page. So now we can then have our equation. So maybe let's just write it as f of x equals a we found to be negative 2, x minus 3, x minus 9. We can then just multiply out. So this would then give us an x squared minus 9x minus 3x plus 27. We can then just simplify inside. So this would then give us a negative 12x plus 27 still. Then multiply in to give us a negative 2x squared plus 24x minus 54. So that in itself would be the equation of f of x, and that would be 1.2. So now, gents, that's what I had wanted to share with you today. Please do have a proper look at the vid, and we should and also please do expect the questions that do follow. A good day to all.